Vanguard!
This self-proclaimed aristocrat vampire dominates the nights of planet Cray. In an endless quest of hunger, he searches for prey to drain their life force to take their strength as his own. One night, this vampire underwent a terrifying transformation as he managed to drain the powers of the Marquis demon lord known as Amon. Now more powerful than ever, Scharhrot Vampir truly became the aristocrat of the night. Scharhrot Vampir is the new aggressive full power VR for Dark Irregulars. It takes a defensive protect clan into the offensive realm. His abilities allows him to overwhelm any opposition. His first ability allows him to channel the power that he sucked straight out of Amon, as once he enters the battle step, he can empower the front row units with an additional 1k power for each and every single card into the soul. This allows him to turn any unit into a dangerous threat, no matter how small they might be. But his second ability really allows him to utilize the power upgrade of his first skill, as once he attacks, for the cost of a single counterblast, he can stand one front or rear guard, allowing them to attack twice with that massive increase of power. But if he managed to suck in 13 cards into the soul or more, then he can stand 2 rear guards instead of 1, allowing him to either stand an entire column, but more ideally allows him to restand both front row units, making both rear guards being able to utilize their increased power potential twice in a single turn. These two abilities together allow Scharhrot Vampir to not only turn any unit into a terrifying threat, but it allows him to even abuse any card that might have a powerful on-attack skill, as he can utilize those skills twice in a single turn. But the best way to see Scharhrot Vampir's full potential is to look at the supporting cast that he commands during the night. One such powerful vampire is Abominable's Gilles the Rais. This is an interesting grade 3 that allows you to superior call cards from the soul. This can either be a great way to set up your field with a good booster behind him, or you can set up your front row by having 2 powerful attackers access to at all times. But the more important thing about Gilles the Rais is that he has a powerful on-attack skill that allows you to retire rearguard for free. That together with Scharhrot Vampir allows you to clear any board on demand without even using your resources. Another really powerful grade 3 support card for Scharhrot Vampir is Number of Terror. This is once again a powerful attacker, as it can easily be a 22k column without the power increase of Scharhrot Vampir, meaning this thing can easily hit the 30 to 40k range. But more importantly, this card can give you a lot of draw potential, as you can put any card into the soul the moment it attacks, giving you 2 draws. This combined with Scharhrot Vampir allows you to draw upwards to 8 cards in a single turn. As once you have 2 Number of Terrors in the front row and 3 rearguards in the back row, you can resolve both Number of Terrors twice, allowing you to get 8 draws out of those Number of Terrors, and then once you add in the drive checks of Scharhrot Vampir himself, gives you 10 cards for that single turn without even counting the draw you get for the turn itself. So this gives Scharhrot Vampir not only access to a very powerful offensive plays, but also a really powerful defensive option. Now, if we move down to the grade 2 lineup, we have a really interesting attacker in the form of Prognos Drei. This card allows us to manipulate the top card of our deck, as we can either leave it on top there or put it into the soul. So this can be utilized as a really good soul charge engine to set up for our Scharhrot himself, or it can be utilized to get to our triggers as consistent as possible, or even certain cards that we might want to, as we have cards like Gilles the Rais and even more cards that allows us to get cards from our soul onto the field or into our hand. Now, so far we've seen a lot of powerful cards, but not really good soul charge engines, and as seen as Scharhrot himself doesn't really generate soul, means we need more supporting cards that do that for us. And a really good card is Demonted Executioner. This is a powerful soul charge engine that can give us a large sum of soul and potentially give us some extra draws. So this is a really good card to effectively go fast through your deck and to see all your important pieces. And on top of that, it can be a really nice beater on our Vanguard circle if we went up to force, as it allows us to hit those units without dedicating a booster behind it. Now, another card that's very similar to Demonted Executioner is Emblem Master. It's similar in the amount of cards that you can soul charge. The only difference is that Emblem Master selectively soul charges cards, so you can filter your deck, but at the same time it doesn't give you the potential draw that Demonted Executioner can. But it can also be a really nice interceptor as well as attacker that can hit for pretty decent numbers. So Emblem Master is a vital card for any Dark Irregulars deck. And the final card that I want to highlight is a grade 1 version of Demonted Executioner in the likes of Yellow Bolt, as this is once again a really powerful soul charge engine if we're able to ride it, and even on the Rigid Circle it can accumulate a lot of soul, and in combination with Scharhrot being able to restand it, can give us even more soul. Now that we've seen the cast itself, let's talk about resources. As we've seen so far, the deck doesn't really use a lot of counterblast. We have the counterblast for Scharhrot himself, and we can use one counterblast here or there with something like Demonted Executioner or Emblem Master, or if we want to superior cost something with Gilles. Now the only time we're going to use these counterblast skills themselves, besides Scharhrot Vampir, is to set up for a Scharhrot Vampir. So the moment we hit the 13 soul or more, that's the moment where we probably will stop using our counterblast for those particular cards. So counterblast will probably be the less of our concerns, especially when we look at a card like Variant Killer Tail that can give us counter charge on demand. But soul, however, is the bigger problem here. We need to set up our soul as fast as possible. Yes, we won't use soul for our skills unless we look at Gilles that superior cost from the soul, but most other cards won't utilize it. It's mainly to set up for our soul conditions themselves, like Prognos Drei, Number of Terror, Gilles, and of course Scharhrot Vampir himself. You need to be able to set up your soul as fast as possible as well as consistent as possible. So this is probably your main priority when building a deck as well as when piloting the deck. Now if we go into the trigger lineup, because this is a protect deck, it allows us to play with less perfect guards, aka the draw sentinels, so we can potentially play more criticals. But at the same time, we do want to play some draws as we need to get access to our important soul charge engines as fast as possible so we can fulfill the condition of Scharhrot at a much more consistent rate. But you do not want to overcommit with draw triggers, as not only are you going to soul charge a lot of cards, so you go faster for your deck, because the Number of Terror combo exists, which allows you to potentially draw 10 cards in a single turn, means you go fast for your deck the moment the deck does what it's supposed to do. So you want to limit the amount of draws you play. So ideally you want to go for a maximum of 4 draws, but probably more want to look at a 10-to-2 split with your criticals and with your sentinels split over your 2 critical sentinels as well as 2 draw PGs. Now in the marker department, this is of course a protect 1 strategy. You're not really going to utilize your protect 2 as much. Yes, Scharhrot can restand your unit so you can get more value out of your circles or your protect markers, but as seen as most of your cards are grade 3s that are your attackers like Gilles, Number of Terror, maybe even Hope on Damp, but mainly Number of Terror is going to be your main attacker, meaning you will not get the most value out of your protect markers at all. You probably won't get the defensive value, mainly for the offensive capabilities, and as seen as Scharhrot himself will already empower those units to really good numbers, means the extra 5k will not be as impactful as it would be otherwise. Now with the basics explained, let's dive into the different builds that we can make for Scharhrot Vampir to really see what this vampire can do. And the first list that we're going to take a look at is this super defensive list that I highlighted in the video beforehand with Number of Terror. As you can see, this list utilizes most of the supporting cards that we discussed. We have Scharhrot Vampir as the main Vanguard, but we also see, of course, Number of Terror, Emblem Master, Yellow Bolt, Prognos Drei, and Demonted Executioner. But we also see some new faces as well. The first one of those cards is Variant's Dragform. This is a supporting grade 3 that allows us to get access to our entire resource package. It allows us to get cards from our soul, as well as putting cards from the damage zone into the soul, and putting new cards into the damage zone. This is a really nice card to fetch whatever card that might accidentally be soul charged via one of our skills, but also if a certain card hits the damage zone we rather want to see in the soul, this can set it up and also get more cards into the damage zone that can potentially give us more options, because this card also interacts really nicely with Killer Tail that can put any card from the damage zone into the soul itself. Now the second new grade 3 that we see is Hope on Damp. This card is mainly our last win condition. If our opponent for some reason is able to survive survive our multiple turns with Scharhrot and the extra multi-attacks that we provide with the high numbers we generate, then this card can easily be the nail in the coffin that seals the deal, as once we slam this thing down and we fulfill its condition, it's unlikely that they will survive, as not only will we attack 5 times, but those attacks will be with massive numbers, and as soon as they need to guard in iterations of 20k shield, it is practically impossible for them to guard every single attack. Now in the grade 1 department, the new cards that we see is Variant's Killertail. This is the card that can somewhat synergize with Variant's Dragform, but it's mainly our countercharge engine, and this is also our main target with Emblem Master, as we want to get that countercharge engine as soon as possible, and we can do that as effectively with Emblem Master by shoving those copies forcefully into the soul once we have access to one of those Killertails. And lastly, we of course see Succubus of Pure Love as our main grade 3 searcher, that allows us to get access to not only Scharhrot Vampir, but also ideally into our number of terrors, and if we get into the late game, it can also search out for our Hope on Damp. Now, the main strategy behind this deck is to set up your Scharhrots as fast as possible with your different multi-attack strategies. But we have a couple of extra lines of plays available to us. We can use Scharhrot Vampir to utilize our unattack skills as efficiently as possible, as we can combine it with Number of Terror, with the combination play that allows us to draw 10 cards, but we can also combine it with Prognos Drei to have multiple manipulations of the top deck, as we can set up our drive checks as well as our defensive checks, and we can combine it with Yellow Bolt to get some extra soul charge options in the early game to set up our soul as fast as possible. But we can also use Variant's Killertail to set up our soul from our damage zone as well as our drop zone. And this card can synergize with Variant's Dragform as well as Succubus of Pure Love, as we can discard certain cards with Succubus of Pure Love, which Variant's Killertail can then put them into the soul from the drop zone, and if we want to, we can fetch them out of the soul with Variant's Dragform. So a good example is that if we have a Hope on Damp in the early game in our hand, we do not really want this card in our hand. So this is an ideal target to discard with whatever skill. But if the game goes into the late game, we can then utilize our Killertail to put that Hope on Damp from the drop zone back into the soul, and then utilize our Dragform to get it out of the soul, so we can then call it from our hand onto the field to get its full capabilities. These type of interactions allows the deck to get access to any cards wherever they might be, and that therefore makes the deck a really powerful, consistent engine. Now, if we want to go for a different approach that's a bit more aggressive and that focuses on utilizing unattack skills, then we can go for this build. As we can see, we have a couple of cards that have unattack skills that therefore synergize with Scharhrot's multi-attack skill. We have Gilles, Prognos Drei, as well as Yellow Bolt. But on top of that, we have some extra cards that synergize really nicely with Gilles. And one of those cards is Authority of Water. This grade 2 allows us to once per turn get a counter charge whenever an opponent's rearguard is retired. As soon as Gilles can retire rearguards for free, allows us to get a counter charge every single turn for free, meaning we can utilize skills like Scharhrot Vampir as well as Gilles' Superior Call skill turn after turn after turn, making it possible to be really aggressive. Another new card that we see in the grade 2 spots is Metallic Wing Curse Princess Rhodia. This is a card that is basically a giant beatstick, and it together with the extra power that Scharhrot provides can be a really big attack that we can utilize twice in a single turn. But on top of that, this can also be a really interesting grade 2 play if we write this as a Vanguard unit and we can build up enough soul in the early game. So it's possible that our opponent cannot even damage us in the early game itself. Now, the final new card that we see is Edge in the Darkness. This grade 1 is here mainly as a synergistic card with Gilles himself, as this card can be called out with Gilles, and once it's being called out by Gilles, it allows us to refund the soul, but also refund the counterblast itself. So as we've seen, we sacrifice the Emblem Master and Variant's Killertail countercharge engine, and in place of that, we utilize cards like Authority of Water as well as Edge in the Darkness as a different countercharge engine that synergizes with Gilles. So the idea of this deck is basically to utilize your unattack skills as often as possible. Use Gilles to destroy your opponent's field, and on top of that you can use Prognos Drei to set up your triggers as efficiently as possible. And the rest of the cards are here to either set up your soul, give you countercharge, or just to be really good beat sticks for just really interesting plays. This deck is a more of a grindy playstyle where you just outvalue your opponent over time time as you keep retiring their units, set up for more triggers, and eventually come with really high beaters in the likes of Rhodia. Now there's one more interesting approach that you can take the Scharhrot Vampir deck. This might not be the most consistent or ideal deck to play, but it's an option that you can employ if you want to do something different. As you can see here, this is quite a shift in playstyle, as in our supporting grade 3 lineup, we can see No Life King Death Anchor. Now this grade 3 allows us to rewrite any grade 3 after the attacks if we acquired enough soul. Now the idea behind this is that you write No Life King and then go into Scharhrot Vampir and use Scharhrot Vampir's ability to restand the front row unit, as seen as the back row units will go into the soul by No Life King. And by doing this we get one extra Vanguard attack. We do sacrifice the extra power that we generate with Scharhrot Vampir as we miss its timings to get the power, but we have some other ways to achieve that. And one of those cards to achieve that is Icicle Resistant. This grade 2 allows us to give any unit an extra 10k power. And what we want to do is to empower our front row units to the maximum potential, so that once we restand with Scharhrot, they become as powerful as possible. Now to round up the strategy to empower our front row units to the max potential, we have Doreen the Thruster. This is a card that gains extra power for every time that we soul charge a card. Now in combination with cards like Variant's Killer Tail, as well as Emblem Master and Demonted Executioner, we can add a lot of soul during the main phase. And once we enter the battle phase and we utilize Death Anchor's ability, we get an additional 20k power onto a Doreen the Thruster as we put 4 extra cards into the soul. So the main idea behind this deck is to set up your Death Anchor, then utilize its skill to rewrite into a Scharhrot Vampir, and then restand your front row units the moment that you attack with your Scharhrot Vampir. And you attack with your rear guards after your No Life King attack, giving you the potential of stacking critical triggers onto those units, and then they can swing twice with a potential extra critical. And you ideally want to have really powerful beaters in the front row, and the best way to achieve that is to either have a Rhodia into the front row, or something like a Doreen the Thruster that is stacked up with a lot of power thanks to the potential of soul charging in the main phase with Emblem Master, Demonted Executioner, as well as Variant's Killer Tail. And the final piece to the puzzle of this combo engine is to utilize Icicle Resistant to give your front row units an additional 10k power for every copy that you have in the soul, to make those restand rearguards as threatening as possible. Now, of course, you don't have to utilize this as your main play every single turn, as you can just go from a Death Anchor back into a Death Anchor to just weaken your opponent's defenses, or you can go just in the Scharhrot normally and just pressure them a couple of turns or 1 or 2 turns with him alone, and then end it off by riding into a Death Anchor that then goes back into a Scharhrot Vampir. Now there's one more card that I want to highlight that has a potential to be utilized within the Scharhrot playstyle, and that is Doppel Vampir. This is another grade 2 that has an unattack ability that allows you to soul charge a card, which also prohibits your opponent to intercept for that attack. This could be a really nice addition to your deck if you want to have more soul charge on demand, but also in a scenario where your opponent is utilizing a lot of interceptors for the defensive value. Then being able to attack twice with him can be really annoying for your opponent to deal with. And on top of that, this card has a built-in way to have a consistent access to him if you put him into soul. So if you combine this with a number of terror, for example, you can keep refunding him once you put him into the soul with a number of terror, and then get him out next turn, and then you can reuse those effects again. Scharhrot Vampir is a really powerful new Vanguard that can empower any units onto the board to a massive numbers and allows the clan to swing in for extra attacks, which is a really powerful feat. The only problem that we face right now is that our deck building options is limited, because so far we haven't seen a lot of unattacked skills within Dark Irregulars itself, meaning we cannot utilize that aspect of the skill. But once we get more support for Dark Irregulars, it is very likely that Scharhrot Vampir will become a lot stronger than it already is right now. Use this video and the contents provided in this video as a starting ground to develop your own personal deck and your own strategies. If you're interested in other deck spotlights, then check out this playlist right here, where we go over many other different decks, as well as decks from VBT09 Butterfly the Moonlight. I want to thank my Patreon supporters over Patreon for making this video possible on the channel. You guys are amazing, as well as you guys watching at home. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!